Welcome to Clienting, your place to get information about legal marketing and client development. This is Kelly Street, Marketing Director for Attorney Sync.
And this is Gyi Kelly, one of the founders of Attorney Sync. Welcome to Clienting. This is Gyi Kelly, one of the founders of Attorney Sync.
And this is Kelly Street, the Marketing Director for Attorney Sync.
Kelly, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. You know, it's just a fabulous day in my life, and I am kind of emanating this really positive attitude today because our guest on Clienting today is one of the most positive people I have ever come across in my entire life and is just a big ol' ray of sunshine.
Well, that is a very positive way to start off this episode of Clienting. Who is our guest today?
Our guest today is Marshall Lichty, and I met him through kind of lawyerist means, as a lot of my lawyer interactions were before I started with Attorney Sync. And you met Marshall at Tech Show just a couple months ago. Is that correct?
I think maybe official meeting. I think Marshall and I chatted briefly before, but yes, we can call Tech Show our official meeting. So Marshall, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Hey, y'all. It's really great to be here. And that was a heck of an introduction. Thanks, Kelly.
Absolutely. Well, you truly are. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, both your role at Lawyerist and then beyond, because you've had a really cool history in the lawyering world.
Yeah. So maybe it makes sense to back up for just a hot minute. So I was very recently a lawyer and a partner in a law firm. And I was also technically the chief operating officer or something. We called it COO, but it was sort of an operations role, which in a law firm kind of meant finance, marketing, sales, IT, all of the non-lawyering stuff, because it was a very small firm. And my partner, who is an excellent lawyer, really needed to be in the delivery of legal services as often as he possibly could. So my job was to help run the firm around that, in addition to having my own practice. So that's where I was until March. And in March, I started my role as the editor-in-chief at Lawyerist. And I'm sure that your audience knows about Lawyerist a bit, so I won't belabor it. But I've joined a great team at Lawyerist. And one of the things that I love about Lawyerist is they have been so intentional and so proactive about building a culture and building systems and building a business, which is what I was trying to do in our law firm. And it was hard. So it was really fun to come into a company that runs very much like a business and has a lot of momentum toward being a well-run business. So editor-in-chief at Lawyerist, where I help write content and provide tools to help lawyers in small and solo law firms around the US and Canada run better businesses. And then the other thing that I do is I am what we call the chief growth officer. And I'm also general counsel of a marketing technology startup that we call GroundSource. And maybe the best way to describe GroundSource is that it's kind of the MailChimp of text messaging, I think is probably the safest way to say it. So we're building a product that will allow brands to communicate in two-way intimate conversations with their people, with the idea that building meaningful relationships with your listeners or your subscribers or your people is a very, very valuable way to grow that relationship and give them more of what they need from your brand. So those are the things that I do.
Awesome. Lots of good things. So I really want to talk about GroundSource to start things off, because I thought it was so interesting, the MailChimp for text messaging, because texting is something that it's mostly how I communicate now. It's a large part of how other people of all ages are starting to communicate. So how can a business use text messaging, or just what are you guys trying to do? All that stuff.
Yeah. So maybe to answer the question, how do businesses use text messaging? My answer in one word is carefully. Brands have to be really, really careful about how they use text messaging, or they are going to be seen as invasive. And invasive is bad marketing in my view. And you guys are the marketing pros, but I think that's probably true across a whole bunch of verticals. In any event, when I think about text messaging, and to make this usable for your listeners who all absolutely use email for marketing and sales, but they didn't always. There used to be a time when an email address was a very intimate thing to give out too, right? You didn't just hand out your email address to a brand or even to some adjacent friend or a third ringer or whatever. You handed out your email address to people that you wanted to invite into a pretty intimate space. Now, email has become very much so less intimate, right? So for that reason, I think text messaging is sort of a new wave in that type of communication, and we'll probably see a similar adoption curve, which just means that I think that text messaging will probably take the arc of the way that email evolved. We just happen to be at the front end of it.
Yeah, I know of an insurance agency that started texting their customers a few years ago because of similar things. They kind of wanted to be on the front end of communicating with their customers because they knew that insurance consumers or purchasers were able to find insurance online easily enough and do it all themselves. And so, as an extra convenience, they added in that service of, hey, we can text you with updates, or that's how we'll go back and forth with you to talk about your insurance policy. And from what I know, it has been very effective for them in keeping younger clients from doing their insurance on their own.
Yeah. And what I really like about the idea of text messaging, I think it can be a useful broadcast medium, right? You can broadcast by text message, but I don't think it's using the platform to its best and highest use. Text messaging is about intimacy. It's about relationship. It's about, a close two-way communication. And so the brands that are doing it the best are brands that use those communications as a two-way tool. So let me give you an example. I think that podcasting is a brilliant application for what GroundSource is building. And the reason that I think that is because podcasting is a really intimate platform. When your podcast is in my ear, it's usually a very intimate time. I'm alone on my drive, or I'm alone on a bike ride, or I'm alone on the bus, or I'm alone on my commute. I'm alone and I'm listening to you, and you two are whispering sweet, sweet nothings into my ear. And so when you propose that there's a new layer for that relationship, text messaging doesn't sound all that much different from the relationship we already have, except it gets to be two-way. It's still intimate. We're still two-way communication, a platform that we kind of hold in higher regard than just email. And you can kind of whisper back and forth to each other. And so a podcast, for example, using GroundSource or a similar tool, could have a relationship with their listeners where they say, hey, listeners, by the way, we're going to have, Marshall Lichty on the podcast this week. What do you want to hear from him? What do you want us to ask him? And then you have listeners all crowdsourcing some of the questions that they most want to hear. And then you're delivering a message to them. Instead of broadcasting it out into this void, you're answering their call for information. And so that's what I like about it, is you can use it as a tool to hear from your audience about what they like and to respond to that and react to it by delivering to them what they need and what they have told you very explicitly they need.
So I have a couple of questions. So let's say I'm a small firm lawyer, solo, and I'm like, okay, I'm listening to clienting, and they're talking about texting in the context of marketing. And so a couple of things that might come up are, one, who am I sending these texts to, right? Like, are these clients? Is this more like just like the general email opt-in? Like, I've opted in to receive a text. And then two is, how do I actually have these conversations? Like, are these texts coming to my cell phone? Because that seems like, wow, that could potentially be a big burden to have to, if I've got a list of 1,000 people that I'm sending broadcast messaging to that they can interact with on my cell phone. The expectation also, and I think it's a really good point, like, it's very intimate. So I have high expectations from text, right? So I don't want the same kind of messaging that I'm getting from my email marketing, signups. The two big things that come off the top of my head are, one, what is the messaging around the opt-in and how does that work? And then two, how do I actually interface, whether I'm using GroundSource or something else? Is the suggestion that these are coming into my own cell phone?
Yeah. So one of the great things about Grounds, this, like I said, this is a tech startup. So we've been able to listen to our clients a lot, and we are in the process of building 2.0. And what 2.0 is going to be much better at is that dashboard. So rather than having you do all of this from your phone, the dashboard is going to be essential. You've got this feedback coming back from people. And it's sort of like, do you remember the movie Minority Report, where Tom Cruise is standing there in front of the screen? He's like moving stuff left and right and kind of bouncing it all over the place. It's a kind of a cool visual. And when I think about what GroundSource's, dashboard will look like, it's going to kind of be that. So a brand manager, somebody who's managing this particular channel, might be able to take a message and throw it over here into the, we don't need to respond to that, but let's put it on, maybe we want to post it on some other channel, some medium of social media, because it's positive feedback. It's like, man, I love clienting. It's the best of all time. Or I love this law firm. But maybe it's, hey, I had a really challenging time with onboarding. I wanted this. You say, oh, okay, well, we can shoot that over to a customer support specialist, or you can pick up the phone and call them and say, I'm really sorry that you struggled with that. So there's a way to kind of triage these messages that come back, and it's through probably a desktop dashboard. You could do it on your phone, but I think that might be a little bit more challenging. So in terms of actually managing that kind of a campaign, it probably doesn't make a ton of sense to get down in the weeds on it, A, because it's not completely built, it's in beta, but also because it is the same problem in a different channel, right? How do you deal with client feedback anytime? The biggest problem for lawyers is not getting client feedback, and it's usually because they're not asking. So the issue for lawyers is really whether it's text messaging or an email newsletter or a straight old landline, phone calling campaign or a net promoter score campaign or whatever. The idea is to ask, get that feedback, and then do something with anything that's actionable.
I think that's helpful. I think, just knowing some of the conversations that I have with lawyers, one, I think that there's, and I think even I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, even when you were practicing, about how you interfaced with your, whether they're clients or former clients via text. Needless to say, this is a newer idea for connecting with people because, like you mentioned at the outset, text is very intimate. We tend to reserve it for our very close personal and professional relationships, or at least that's kind of how I think of it. And so expanding that or providing a means for more people to be able to interface with text, there's no question that text is one of the most ubiquitous forms of communication. But, just responding to some of like lawyers' apprehension, we know lawyers, right? They're going to be like, well, I don't want to get in trouble with like the TCPA, or if I don't even know if I got that legislation right. But sending unsolicited text messages comes with some heavy fines. And so I'm going to be a little bit reticent about that. So I think that there's no doubt that text can play a role in professional development, and it certainly does. I mean, I know professionally, I give out my cell phone number directly to people in my professional network, but at the same time, I want to think about those objections and how an expert like you is speaking to those objections that you might find for people that might be reluctant to do that. So that was really a long-winded rant. Just out of curiosity, when you were practicing, did you give people the ability to text you directly?
I did. And first of all, there's a bunch of technology out there around texting that is not about GroundSource, right? You can have your law practice management software or some other legal marketing technology tools out there that will allow you to text, usually in a more of a broadcast way, but you can integrate that into your systems. Like, that is a thing. It's not difficult to do. I do recommend that you try to systematize it to the extent that you can, because so now getting back to your question, Gyi, did I give people the ability to text me? Absolutely. I put my cell phone in my email signature block. I don't necessarily recommend that unless you want to be intentionally doing that. But so I had people choosing to text me all of the time, and they were one-offs, and they were clients who very clearly preferred to text with me, and that became our chosen way of communicating. The problem with doing it in a one-off is there's no way to capture that. There's no way to capture that in your CRM. There's no way to capture it in your Clio file or your MyCase file or whatever. It's just a text that lives outside of your system. So I recommend trying to find a way to systematize it if that is your client's chosen way of communicating, because there is a lot of valuable information in there for a variety of reasons. Second, I would just say that when you are communicating with folks that way, it is just like communicating with them. It's just like communicating with somebody that you normally text with, right? If my wife sends me a text message and doesn't hear from me for an hour, her response is sort of like, why is he not texting me? He must be doing something or whatever, because my expectation is that I'm going to get a response to that really quickly. And so you want to be clear if you are going to integrate text messaging into your either client experience or marketing, that you set some expectations for how you're using it and why, right? You don't want somebody to be texting into the ether and not get a response for 9 days, because that's not how they use texting, and they'll stop using it that way.
Right. No, I think that's really one of the core things that I was thinking about. I think it's so important that, regardless of technology, so much of this is setting expectations and developing guidelines and rapport with whether it's clients or potential clients or referral sources, because for that exact reason is that the expectations with text are much different than they are from Twitter, Facebook, email, and even phone calls.
Absolutely. But as you think about the sort of the progression of intimacy that came from, it used to be the case that if you wanted to talk to your lawyer, you came in and had a meeting with them. And so the expectation was that you would call and that you would set something up with an administrative assistant of some sort, and that would be a week away. And then you come in and you talk and blah, blah, blah. Maybe you'd write some letters back and forth. Well, then email came around, and now email sped up that process. And now instant messaging on your website speeds up that process, and text messaging speeds up that process. So we are in a cycle where the expectation for communicating with a brand is near immediate feedback unless you tell somebody otherwise. So I agree with your point, which is tell them otherwise if that's not your expectation. Otherwise, you need to use that tool like that tool was intended to be used.
So when you're text messaging with clients, what are the kinds of things that you, as a lawyer, what are the kinds of things that you're comfortable with texting? And then what sorts of stuff would you reserve for a more formal form of communication, whether it's in person or via email?
Yeah, I think, and this kind of goes more toward, again, client experience. This is someone with whom you already have a relationship. They're already a client. You have some sort of ongoing feedback loop with them. So in that sense, as long as you are capturing the data somewhere, I don't care, right? If you've got a client who prefers text messaging and you're in the middle of a settlement negotiation and, she knows that there's another offer coming from the other side, and you just send her a text message that says 125K ? And she says yes, that's fine. I think that's just fine. I'm sure that there are plenty of people out there who would say that's a terrible idea. But now you have enough communication to at least be able to say, okay, I think we're in business. Now let's pick up the phone and talk about the details, or now let's reduce this to an email, or now let's have a meeting to make sure, whatever. So I think that text messaging very much, as long as it's being captured, can be used just the way that all of our communications channels can be. It just depends on what your client is most comfortable with. And this goes back to onboarding, in my view. One of the things that I struggled with, and believe me, I struggled a lot as a law firm owner. I don't want to suggest that any of these things are things that I did well, or that I systematized particularly well, or that I was able to integrate firm-wide very well. This is hard to integrate this, even if it's just email. How do we plan to capture email as a firm? So adding a new layer, a new channel will be equally hard. But, when I was a law firm owner, we used text messaging with our clients because they loved it. We were able to have meaningful communications with them that helped move the ball on their project by text messaging. If we did a better job of onboarding them, and in our onboarding process, we said, hey, how do you prefer for us to communicate with you? Do you want us to pick up the phone? Do you want us to only pick up the phone on really big stuff? Do you want us to email most of the time? Do you want us to text most of the time? If you start asking those questions right at the very beginning, you can get into your best and highest communication mode more quickly. So I would recommend that for client onboarding. Just how do you prefer for us to communicate with you most of the time?
So speaking of getting people's approval for the way they want to be communicated with, since ground source is kind of, you equate it to MailChimp, how do you suggest firms, or how did you, besides just communicating on their individual case, how did you go about getting approval, or how would you suggest people go about getting approval for kind of those more marketing messages via text messaging?
Yeah, so there's a practical side, and then there's sort of the legal regulatory side. The legal regulatory side is that you need to give people, first of all, you can not send an unsolicited text message, and B, you need to give people the easiest way to stop getting text messages that you possibly can. And that's why whenever you subscribe to a text message newsletter of any sort, which I'm sure you've done, one of the first things that it says is, hey, you asked me to send this to you. I sent it to you. If you don't want me to send it anymore, reply stop, or reply no more, or reply whatever. So there's an element of this that is just purely regulatory or legal perspective. Make sure that you are giving them the opportunity to opt out and stop being communicated with in that way. The other part of it is, of course, what are they comfortable with? And in a MailChimp campaign, you have people who opt in and then they've opted in and now they get pounded with email and they're like, oh my goodness, what have I done to myself? If you're not careful, people will just fully unsubscribe from anything that comes from your domain, right? And you don't want that as someone who's trying to market to them. So you want to be able to segment your messages as you get more sophisticated in the use of ground source, for example, or some other tool as a communication platform. You want to be able to say, okay, here is your matter specific communication through text messaging. And then here is our other list. Here's our, our marketing list or our news, text message newsletter update. And if you want to unsubscribe from that, great. It will not impact your subscription to your text messaging on your matter specific link. So I think the key is to have segmented lists for users, just like you do in an email campaign. Otherwise, you get an opt-out and then you lose them.
Right. No, I think that's fantastic advice. Bringing the idea of text messaging into the marketing mix is, as you mentioned, I think it's a natural kind of evolution. I think that the devil's in the details of how you're implementing it. And I think you want to be, as you should be for all of your messaging, and whether it's email or something else, getting permission is both, one, yes, the legal stuff is super important so you don't get hit with huge fines, but also it's just not as effective, right? So if you're spamming people in text, that's not a good way to make a friend.
Right. And in fact, it's a great way to make an enemy.
Right. This tech stuff was extremely interesting and very valuable for people to start thinking about how they might be able to implement that. I kind of wanted to change gears, or maybe slightly change gears is related, but you have a fantastic wealth of knowledge, not only from formerly practicing, but also in your role at Lawyerist. You're in a community of all of these lawyers that are regularly talking about things relating to client development. So I kind of wanted to open up, and this is a little bit more abstract. What types of things are you hearing on the ground from community members? These are practicing lawyers in terms of client development, what's working, systems and processes. What are the front lines of practice talking about in terms of whether it's using technology for client development or just, old-fashioned word-of-mouth marketing? What are folks talking about today?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say about the crew at Lawyerist, our readers, our listeners to the podcast, things like that, is these folks tend to be on the front edge of this stuff, right? The folks who are paying attention to what Lawyerist talks about are people who recognize that practicing law is a profession, but it is also a business. And the people in our, listener sphere or reader sphere are people who believe that to their core. And that, I think, in lawyering makes them relatively unique. I think that there is a vast legion of people out there who don't think about running their law practice as a business. They think about a law practice. And so they don't think very much about marketing. They don't think very much about sales. When I was a lawyer, I represented startups and small businesses. And most businesses that are not professional service firms, one of the first people that they hire is a salesperson. And not long after that, they've got a marketing professional brought on board. And maybe they even grow their sales team a little bit more before they really dive into, spending resources on ops and whatever. So they're building out the sales and marketing infrastructure from early on. And that means that they have a whole bunch of tools. They have people who are really sophisticated in the art and science of sales. There are people who are sophisticated in using the tools of the trade, which is to say social media. They're sophisticated in direct mail campaigns. They understand media buys. They understand a sales funnel. They understand qualifying leads. They understand a whole bunch of stuff that is like marketing and sales 101 in almost every other business. And you come into a law firm and you're like, okay, well, who's your salesperson?
Crickets.
Yeah, it's crickets. Well, what's your marketing department look like? Okay. What is your marketing plan? And the answer is crickets for all of these questions. And so when you ask the question that way, Gyi, what I would say is the people in the Lawyerist universe are people who recognize that they have to have tools to respond to that question. And the great thing is they're doing it in a billion different ways, right? We have people who are, sort of lawyerist friendly, who are thinking up incredible ways to onboard new clients. They have a seamless system that is repeatable and scalable, and it is driven by what their customers' expectations are, and their whole goal in life is to make their customer onboarding experience just absolutely impeccable. There are other people who say, well, I need to be able to capture all of this data, and we can try a bunch of different things. Some people are using Google Forms to stick it into a spreadsheet. Some people have a CRM. Some people are using the content management stuff within their practice management software. So the great thing is what the leading edge of sales and marketing experimentation in the lawyerist ecosystem is really sort of like pretty basic stuff. And I don't know that there are best practices out there. We have a lot of people in our ecosystem who are thinking about those things, but a lot of it is really relatively rudimentary for, the broader business community. Do you have a CRM? What do you know about your clients and potential clients? Do you have a way to identify someone as something other than a client, right? A lot of law firms don't have any way to thin slice their relationships with people other than, well, they're either a client or they're not a client. There are a lot of people who are former clients. There are people who are otherwise in the sales funnel that our ecosystem full of lawyers is starting to pay a lot of attention to.
I know what you mean when you say there's just this lump of people who are, potential clients or current clients or former clients, but what do you mean by thinking about those in a little different way?
Yeah, so, when you talk about sales funnels, there is a universe of people that you don't know about and they don't know about you. They're an idea, right? So the very top of your sales funnel is it's just your customer avatar. If you sit down and you think about who is my ideal customer and you scope out in pretty good detail what your ideal customer looks like, the number of people in your sales funnel is exactly the number of people that fit your customer avatar. Right? It's between a 27 and a 49-year-old person who owns a business and has a partner and and lives in this geographic area and and you build out this avatar. Your leads, your people in your funnel are the people who check those boxes. The job of an effective marketing and sales function is to move them from just that idea to learning about your brand, to having some exposure to your brand, to learning to trust your brand, to hearing more about your brand, to believing that they might envision themselves using your brand, to hearing a specific sales pitch about your brand, to then hearing that maybe again or 2 times or 3 times, and then having a follow-up, and then deciding that they'll use it, but only if it's a free trial. And then, right, so the art and science of funnels, marketing funnels and sales funnels is something that will be different for every firm. Like, how do you decide when somebody is now someone that we should approach about doing business for them in some more systematized way or some more formal way? But right now, to the point that I made earlier, and I guess this is back to your question, which is, what do you mean there's more than just a lump of people who either are clients or used to be clients? And the answer is, if you are not paying attention to the people who are not yet clients in a strategic and meaningful and systematized way, you're missing out on huge opportunities. Because the argument that lawyers always make is, my new business comes from referrals, word of mouth. People who have used our firm before in the past, go tell someone, and the listener hears about us and comes to reach out to us, and that's how I get more business. Well, that's a good model, but it blows up the idea that a sales funnel or a marketing funnel is a real thing. Because by the time somebody hears a really good, strong recommendation from somebody that they trust, they should theoretically be pretty far down your sales funnel already.
I love all the things you're saying, because the episode that will be airing before yours does, we spoke with a lawyer, Alex Barthet, who's a Miami construction attorney, and he echoed the same thing that you just said for the last couple minutes there, where they really pay attention to where their clients are coming from, and then also breaking down, okay, yes, this one was a referral, but where did that person who made the referral, where did they come from? So we know we can attribute, 2 or 3 layers of clients to this particular source.
And what powerful knowledge that is, right? And then you can go back to the people who have made those referrals, and then your call to action to them is just, hey, do more of that. Do more of the thing that you did that resulted in us getting business, whether that's making a in-person recommendation to somebody that they know fits your customer avatar. Hey, don't forget to tell your friends about us that we do this exact kind of law. Or maybe that wasn't it. Maybe what they did was they wrote a 5-star review on your Facebook page. Then you can go out and say, hey, anybody who has a 5-star worthy review of us, would you please put it on our Facebook page? And then you can start making calls to action with these groups of people and say, okay, cohort, you are the kind of person that can really help us if you just share share your feelings about us. And if you do that, that will be good for us and whatever. And so working through that process of how you ask them, how you identify them as, I'll use the word net promoters. How do you know that they are promoters of yours? Finding that out and then asking them to act on it. If you have done the work to learn why that's so important and so valuable for your business, then it's really easy to pour resources into asking more people to do that more often and better.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that when we had Jared Cree on a previous episode, he talked about that his relationship with clients does not end after they stop being a client. He keeps communicating with them or checking back in with people because you never know when someone could need you again. You never know when someone could make a referral or need themselves as a former client, need a referral to a lawyer in a different practice area.
I was thinking about this in the context of law firms losing talent recently. Some of the bigger law firms in Minneapolis, I live in Minneapolis and used to work for a decent sized law firm in Minneapolis. Some of the law firms in Minneapolis, I'm sure this is true across the country, have taken to really spending some resources on what they're calling their alumni networks, right? What an alumni network of people who used to work at a big firm is people who have left that firm, right? Sometimes they leave because they hate it, or sometimes they leave because they got a new opportunity somewhere, or sometimes, they leave for a billion different reasons. But if the law firm is really, really good about reaching out to them and they have them in some sort of a bucket that they can market to them in and say, hey, when you left us, this was the case, but now we've changed a little bit. Now we actually help. We can now service this kind of client, or we just changed our website, or we just did X, Y, and Z. What they're finding is that those alumni networks are people who will gladly refer business back to their old employer. And so the same holds true for clients, right? If you have former clients and you just let them go, you are missing out on an opportunity in a whole bunch of ways because, they had an experience with you and they spent money on you and hopefully they actually paid their bill. And you have more than just a business transactional relationship. You have an emotional connection with them. And if you are able to tap into that emotional connection in a positive way, they will go out and be your sentries out in the world and they'll be your little brand advocates. And what more powerful thing exists in the world? But you have to activate them. You have to give them the knowledge that they need to know what your practice areas are. You have to give them a call to action. You have to say, here's what we would really love for you to do. Oh, you were happy with your experience with us? That's awesome. I love that. Would you just do us a favor? Could you write us a review on Facebook? Would you be willing to record a little video with us talking about how your experience was great? Or would you be willing to, sit on our podcast, or would you, and we write a blog post about your experience with us? So there are a bunch of ways where you can activate those kinds of networks and keep them involved in your brand. Have them on a special email list or a special text message list, or in line for a phone call every 6 months where you just say, hey, we're just checking in on you. Wanted to say, we're thinking about you. Those kinds of things can be super valuable in the future.
When you were practicing on a full-time basis and kind of thinking about those kinds of things, did you do all of that stuff?
No.
And thank you for your honesty. Because I know one thing that we hear or that comes up is how to either automate that stuff or how much time do those things take? Because when you're trying to practice law, you're trying to practice law and work on actual client cases. Do you have recommendations for how people fit that in to their kind of daily clienting?
I saw what you did there.
Name drop.
Yeah. So, what I have is, first of all, the experience of feeling that pain. So if you are listening to this and you are a law business owner who wants to do more of this and can't because you have so much client work, I get it. I hear you. And it is hard, period. The second thing that I will say is when you recognize the power that comes with effective sales and marketing, I dare you to not want to spend time on it, right? The idea that you can just ignore this stuff and neglect this stuff and grow your business, or have you in a position where you can hire more talent, or where you can start selecting better clients, or where you can raise your rates so that, the clients that you do work for are more, better fit for your expertise or your experience or what you want to be doing. All of those things come from an effective marketing and sales function. They come from telling the world what you want to be doing and what you're good at, what your ideal client is, attracting those clients and then sending them through your system. So part of it is just lawyers think of themselves, to the extent they think of sales and marketing at all, they think of themselves as their firm's sales and marketing function. I implore you to rethink that and come up with ways to create sales and marketing function to support your business. Some people offload that, right? And this is, I am not a paid advocate of Attorney Sync or any other marketing platform for that matter, but there are professionals who are in the business of helping you build a marketing plan and implementing it from, really sound, time-tested techniques that grow your brand and grow the ability for your ideal client to find you and engage you. So partly it's that. Don't be afraid to outsource some of this and spend some money on it. One of the recurring criticisms of small and solo law firm lawyers is they never reinvest much of their revenue back into the business. They take it all out, and I understand that, right? I get that. But if you can find a way to dedicate yourself to reinvesting in some marketing help and some sales help, that will be a good start. The second thing is there are tools galore. So what I would think about, I don't know if you guys have been through this on the podcast, so forgive me if you've already been over it. But for me, the idea of a customer journey is so attractive. Thinking from the very beginning of what it's like to be one of your customers to the very end, and then go through there and find the stickiest, nastiest little problem and dedicate yourself to fixing it this quarter. That's a great start. Like, I want to fix that. I don't want it to be hard for people to get onboarded here. So we're going to create a little Google form, and anytime somebody calls us, we're going to send it out to them and they'll fill it out themselves, and then we'll have reduced some of the friction in their experience. And then do it again the next quarter and again the next quarter. And then you get into a problem that's too big, hire it out. I just think that having an appreciation for sales and marketing as things and deciding that you are going to dedicate resources to them, whether it's your own time and energy or whether it's spending money to have somebody else pour their time and energy and expertise into it, it is time and energy and money well spent.
Well, I couldn't have wrapped this up with a better bow than what you just said.
Well, there you have it.
I thought that was phenomenal. I think so much of it is you got to start somewhere. And so a lot of folks get overwhelmed by this stuff. But, look, I think we covered a lot of good things today. I think folks will be interested to explore this idea of text messaging. And at the end of the day, spending at least some time thinking about how you're implementing some of these systems, I think is some great advice. And certainly want to thank Marshall for taking the time to sit with us today. And as always, if you have questions or suggestions or topics, or you'd like to be a guest, please don't hesitate to reach out to us to connect. Thanks again for stopping in. And thank you so much for your time today, Marshall. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Gyi and Kelly. I really had fun doing it. And, if your listeners are already listening to your podcast, it means that they're already thinking about this stuff. And so they don't need me to encourage them to do it. They're already doing it. And you're in good hands.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.